Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Sign the contract, become my husband, and I will hand you his head on a silver platter. Refuse, and you can bleed out on my Persian rug. It makes no difference to me. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as the blade that had grazed Julian's ribs only an hour ago. Thunder rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office, the flash of lightning illuminating the silhouette of the man sitting behind the obsidian desk. Julian pressed a trembling hand against his side, the white dress shirt he wore, stolen from a laundry line during his desperate escape, already blooming with a dark, wet crimson stain. He didn't look like the brilliant architect who had designed the city's skyline. He looked like a hunted animal. But as he stared into the predatory, steel-gray eyes of Damien Vane, the ruthless alpha CEO of Vane Enterprises, Julian didn't flinch. He had already died once tonight when his fiancée pushed him off the pier. The man standing here now was merely a ghost fueled by the purest, most volatile gasoline, vengeance. Julian slammed his blood-streaked hand onto the pristine contract, smearing the paper, and grabbed the fountain pen. I don't just want his head, Damien, Julian rasped, his voice wrecked from the salt water and the screaming. I want his legacy. I want his name. I want him to watch as I take everything he stole from me, and I want him to know that you are the one who gave it to me. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and the sterile chill of the air conditioning, battling against the metallic tang of Julian's blood and the faint, distressed sweetness of his omega pheromones. Damien Vane leaned forward, the leather of his chair creaking. He was the mirror image of his twin brother, Caleb, yet entirely different. Where Caleb was golden smiles and false warmth, Damien was a glacier, beautiful, terrifying, and unyielding. He was known in the business world as the Silent Reaper, a man who dismantled companies with the precision of a surgeon and the apathy of a machine. You are a mess, Julian, Damien said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in Julian's chest. He didn't sound concerned. He sounded like he was appraising a piece of property that had been damaged in transit. And whose fault is that? Julian countered, his legs shaking as the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the searing pain in his side. Your brother. He didn't just steal my blueprints. He didn't just scrub my name from the archival records of the Seraphim Project. He tried to kill me tonight because he knew I found the offshore accounts. He knew I could prove he's been embezzling from you to fund his gambling debts. Damien stood up. He was massive, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than Julian's entire life savings. He walked around the desk, his movements fluid and silent, a predator closing the distance. I know Caleb is a thief, Damien said dismissively. I have known for months. Julian blinked, his vision swimming. You knew. I am the CEO for a reason, little architect. Nothing happens in this company without my knowledge. Damien stopped inches from Julian. The height difference was daunting. Damien towered over him, radiating an alpha aura that was usually suffocating. But to Julian, in his weakened state, it felt strangely grounding, like gravity. But knowing he is stealing and proving it publicly without shattering the company's stock value are two different things. Caleb is the media darling, the golden boy. If I execute him without a successor, the board panics. I need a distraction. I need a narrative shift. Damien reached out, his long fingers tilting Julian's chin up. He examined the bruise forming on Julian's jawline, his expression unreadable. And I need a spouse to unlock the grandmother's trust fund that Caleb is so desperate to get his hands on, Damien murmured. He thought killing you would clear the board for him to marry that oil heiress. Imagine his face when he walks into the gala tomorrow and sees you, alive, wearing his family ring, married to the brother he fears most. It's a business transaction, Julian whispered, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Not from fear, but from the sudden, intoxicating proximity. This was the man he had been warned about, the monster. But the monster hadn't pushed him into the ocean. Strictly business, Damien agreed. His thumb brushed over Julian's lower lip, wiping away a smear of salt and grime. The touch was electric, a stark contrast to the cold words. "But you are bleeding on my floor, Julian, and I cannot debut a corpse at the gala. It would be bad for public relations." Julian's knees finally gave out. The room spun, the darkness at the edges of his vision rushing inward. He expected to hit the hard floor. He expected the pain. Instead, he felt strong arms catch him. He was hoisted into the air, held against a chest that felt like a fortress wall. The scent of sandalwood, cold rain, and expensive tobacco enveloped him. Damien's scent. It was overpowering, aggressively masculine, and yet, it didn't make Julian gag like Caleb's cloying artificial citrus cologne had. It smelled like safety. "Don't die on me yet." Damien's voice rumbled against his ear, sounding miles away. "We haven't even had the honeymoon." That was the last thing Julian heard before the darkness took him completely. When Julian woke, the world was soft. He was lying on a bed that felt like a cloud, wrapped in sheets of Egyptian cotton with a thread count higher than his credit score. The room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a bedside lamp. He tried to sit up, but a sharp tug in his side stopped him. He looked down. His torso was bandaged expertly, the white gauze stark against his pale skin. He was wearing a silk pajama shirt that was too large for him, Damien's. "You've been asleep for 14 hours. Julian snapped his head toward the corner of the room. Damien was sitting in a wingback chair, reading a tablet, a glass of whiskey resting on the table beside him. He had discarded his jacket and tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the column of his throat. He looked lethally casual. "The gala," Julian rasped, "starts in 3 hours. Damien finished, not looking up. "The doctor said you have 2 fractured ribs and severe hypothermia. He recommended bed rest for a week." "I have to go," Julian said, forcing himself to sit up despite the agony. "If I don't show up, Caleb wins. He thinks I'm dead. He's probably planning my memorial service right now to garner sympathy votes from the board." Damien finally looked at him. His gaze traveled over Julian's disheveled hair, the dark circles under his eyes, and the determination set in his jaw. "You are stubborn," Damien noted, "a trait I usually detest in Omegas. But in you, it is useful." He stood and walked over to the bed. He placed a hand on Julian's forehead, checking his temperature. The contact was brief, clinical, yet it sent a shiver down Julian's spine. "Why?" Julian asked quietly. "Why help me? You could have just taken the evidence I gave you and let me disappear. Why the marriage? Why the medical care?" Damien's eyes darkened. For a second, the mask of the indifferent CEO slipped, revealing something primal and possessive beneath. "Because Caleb made a mistake," Damien said softly. "He broke something that had the potential to be magnificent. I saw your designs, Julian. The Seraphim project? It wasn't just good. It was visionary. Caleb doesn't have the capacity to create art. He only knows how to consume it. I detest waste." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And because when you walked into my office, soaked and bleeding, looking like a vengeful spirit, you were the most interesting thing that has happened to me in a decade. I want to see what you do next." He pulled back, the mask returning instantly. "Get up. The stylists are waiting outside. If you are going to be my husband, you need to look the part. Tonight you are not a victim. You are a vein." The preparations were a whirlwind of activity that felt more like armoring a knight than dressing a groom. A team of silent, efficient stylists descended upon Julian. They concealed his bruises with high-end cosmetics, styled his hair into a sleek, elegant wave that framed his sharp features, and dressed him in a tuxedo that was a masterpiece of tailoring. It was white, a deliberate, mocking choice. White for purity. White for a wedding. But the cut was sharp, modern, with a deep crimson lining that flashed like a warning whenever he moved. When Julian looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize himself. The terrified man who had clawed his way out of the freezing water was gone. In his place stood someone colder, harder, someone beautiful and dangerous. Damien entered the room, dressed in a matching tuxedo of midnight black. The contrast between them was striking, light and dark, angel and demon. He stood behind Julian, their reflections meeting in the glass. "Perfect," Damien murmured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a simple band. It was a heavy platinum setting holding a rare, blood-red ruby. The Vane family heirlooms. "Give me your hand." Julian extended his left hand. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Damien slid the ring onto his finger. Fit perfectly. "This ring belonged to my great-grandmother," Damien said, his eyes locking with Julian's in the mirror. "She was known for poisoning her enemies during tea parties. I thought it suited you." A dry, dark laugh bubbled up in Julian's throat. "Is that a warning?" "It's a promise," Damien replied. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of Julian's ear. "Tonight, we enter the lion's den. Caleb will try to hurt you. He will try to gaslight you. He will try to make you feel small." "I know," Julian whispered. "But he cannot touch you," Damien continued, his voice hardening into steel. "Because you belong to me now, and I protect what is mine." The possessiveness of the statement should have alarmed Julian. He had just escaped one controlling man. Was he walking into the cage of another? But Caleb's control had been built on lies and belittlement. Damien's control felt different. Felt like a shield. It was a transaction, yes, but one where Julian held equity. "Let's go," Julian said, turning to face his husband. "I have a funeral to crash." The grand ballroom of the Vane Hotel was a sea of diamonds, velvet, and shark smiles. The city's elite had gathered for the annual gala, unaware that they were about to witness a massacre. At the center of the room, holding court with a glass of champagne in hand, was Caleb. He looked dashing, his golden hair perfectly coiffed, his smile bright and practiced. He was laughing at a joke made by a senator, his arm draped possessively around the waist of a young woman, the oil heiress. Julian stood at the top of the grand staircase, his hand resting on Damien's arm. From this vantage point, Caleb looked small, pathetic. "Ready?" Damien asked. "Always," Julian lied. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the CEO of Vane Enterprises, Mr. Damien Vane, and his husband, Mr. Julian Vane." The silence was instantaneous. It swept through the room like a shockwave. Heads turned. Glasses lowered. The music faltered and died. Caleb froze. The smile slid off his face like wet clay. He turned slowly, his eyes widening in disbelief as he looked up at the staircase. Julian descended with Damien, step by step, moving with a regal grace that defied his injuries. He locked eyes with Caleb and didn't look away. He saw the color drain from Caleb's face. He saw the glass in Caleb's hand tilt, spilling champagne onto the expensive floor. It was delicious. They reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parting for them like the Red Sea. Damien guided Julian straight toward his brother. The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone knew Julian was Caleb's fiancé or had been. The gossip was already flying via text message across the room. "Caleb," Damien said, his voice smooth and projecting easily in the silent room. "I believe you know my husband." Caleb's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked from Damien to Julian, his brain unable to process the impossibility of the situation. "Julian? But you thought I was unable to attend?" Julian finished for him, his voice clear and melodic. He stepped forward, invading Caleb's personal space. He let the scent of his distress, which he had been suppressing, spike just enough for Caleb to smell it. The scent of the ocean, the scent of the pier. "I had a slight accident," Julian said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I fell into some bad company, but thankfully Damien found me. He picked me up when no one else would." Caleb's eyes darted around the room. He saw the board members whispering. He saw the heiress stepping away from him, confused. He realized his narrative was crumbling. Panic began to set in. "This is insane," Caleb hissed, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "You can't do this, Julian. You're mine. We have a contract." "The engagement contract?" Julian laughed softly. "I burned it, along with the designs you claimed were yours." "You little b****, Caleb snarled, his facade cracking. He reached out to grab Julian's arm, his alpha instincts flaring in a burst of aggression. "I'll kill you for real this ti." Crack. Before Caleb's hand could even graze Julian's sleeve, Damien had intercepted him. Damien's grip on Caleb's wrist was bone-crushing. The sound of the wrist snapping echoed in the silent ballroom. Caleb screamed, dropping to his knees. The crowd gasped. Damien didn't let go. He twisted Caleb's arm further, forcing his brother to bow before Julian. Damien's expression was terrifyingly calm, but his pheromones flooded the space. A crushing weight of dominance that made every other alpha in the room instinctively lower their heads. It was the aura of a true king. "Touch him again," Damien whispered, loud enough for the nearby circle to hear, "and I will tear your arm off and beat you to death with it." He released Caleb, who crumpled to the floor, cradling his broken wrist, sobbing in pain and humiliation. Damien turned to the crowd, straightening his cuffs. "My apologies for the disturbance. My brother seems to have had too much to drink. Please, enjoy the evening." He placed a hand on the small of Julian's back, guiding him away from the sobbing man on the floor. As they walked toward the VIP section, Julian felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't just satisfaction. It was awe. He looked up at Damien, at the sharp profile of the man who had just declared war on his own blood for him. "You broke his wrist," Julian murmured. "He offended my husband," Damien replied simply. He glanced down at Julian, and for the first time, a genuine, albeit small, smile touched his lips. "And we are just getting started. The board meeting is tomorrow morning. That is when we take his shares." Julian looked back at Caleb, who was being helped up by security, humiliated and broken. The man who had stolen his life was now nothing more than a stain on the floor. Julian turned back to Damien, squeezing his hand. "I can't wait." But as the night wore on, and the champagne flowed, Julian noticed the way Damien watched him. It wasn't just protective anymore. It was hungry. The line between business and pleasure was blurring faster than Julian had anticipated. And deep down, in the part of his soul that craved the fire, Julian wondered if he had traded a snake for a dragon, and if he was ready to be devoured. And that is how the disgraced architect rose from the dead to crown a new king. If you enjoyed seeing Damien bring his brother to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. Would you marry the ruthless twin of the man who tried to kill you for revenge? Or is that too dangerous a game? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.